And I sat there on the sofa and I thought to myself, there is nothing materially wrong with my life right now. And yet in my brain and body, it feels like there's something so terribly wrong.
Tell me a little bit about how you first came to realize you had OCD.
Yeah, so in my late teens and into my 20s, I was in talk therapy on and off in SSRI for anxiety, depression, body image issues, and obsessive, sticky, looping thoughts was very much a part of the conversation. OCD definitely came up. I just don't think it had hit hard, and so I personally didn't over-identify with that label. But yeah, it was definitely there.
When you first started learning about OCD, how did the reality of it differ from what you maybe kind of assumed about it or heard in the media, the misconceptions out there?
For me, OCD was excessive hand washing, checking the stove, checking locks. It was your very observable, overt, compulsive behavior. So even when OCD was brought up, I didn't totally grab onto that. It was like, well, yeah, I do have this obsessive thought pattern. And yeah, I am concerned with STDs, but I mean, that is somewhat responsible, right? And so I just didn't identify with OCD. I didn't see myself in those stereotypes. It wasn't until I got married that the floodgates opened. That was the period of time where I felt like my ability to trust my intuition and senses was being systematically hijacked. I was like overtaken by doubt, and it started with a single thought. So I went to my husband, the person I loved and trusted, and I was like, hey, do you ever get random thoughts about people from your past? Because sometimes I do, and it really bothers me. It makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong. And he was so unfazed. He was like, well, we've lived lives before we met one another. Of course you're going to have thoughts about people from your past. It doesn't mean you want to be with that person. But like, yeah, I think that's totally normal. And I was like, like, I got that reassurance, right? And I felt so good that night. And then it continued to happen. I started to go to this place of like, will this happen forever? And if it does, like, that doesn't seem fair to be in a marriage and this be happening. So I went to my sister and to my primary care physician at that point because I was like, I think I need to go back on an SSRI. And they both said basically the same thing he said, but they both added, you don't have to share every single thought that you have with a person. And I was like, I don't? Like, I was trying to be like abundantly loyal, right? And like, who else am I going to go to for comfort? And it took, John Green talks about obsessions starting as like a snowflake and then a few and then a snowstorm and a whiteout. And that took it to complete whiteout for me. It was replaying the conversation that I had with him, trying to gain perfect clarity on exactly what I said, what he said back, what his facial expressions were, what his demeanor was the next morning. Is he wanting to divorce me? Does he think I want to divorce him? How could I hurt his feelings? I'm a terrible person. I've ruined this marriage. I've tainted it. I mean, it was so extreme. And I sat there on the sofa and I thought to myself, there is nothing materially wrong with my life right now. And yet in my brain and body, it feels like there's something so terribly wrong. I think I need to see a psychiatrist. I'd never seen a psychiatrist before. So I made an appointment, went in, laid out my history, including the discussion of obsessive sticky thoughts. And I just said, this does not make sense. This does not add up. I've never been so sure of any adult decision really in my life as wanting to marry him. I think this is OCD. And she agreed and gave me 2 prescriptions to bring more immediate relief to supplement the SSRIs. And she looked at me with she had the best bedside manner. And she had this smile of calm, like wise confidence. And she just said, go live your life, go enjoy your husband. And I needed that in that moment. And I left the office and I thought, okay, it's going to be okay. The medication worked. I slept so well that I emailed her, thanking her profusely. And it took down the physiological symptoms substantially. The thoughts were still happening and I would still get little pings of anxiety, but I could think in a more linear fashion. I could put one foot in front of the next. So we really wanted to to have a family. And that was like very important to both of us. And we, wanted to do that pretty quickly. So we were fortunate enough to get pregnant right away. And the OCD immediately jumped over to that in terms of this concept of doing pregnancy, like quote unquote, perfectly. And how do I do that? And part of that for me was I can't be on an SSRI. So I went off the SSRI, but it really just latched onto other things, anything it could get its hands on that year. Like when OCD is bad, when you're in the thick of it, it's unrelenting. And that's when I found my way to exposure and response prevention. So I found an ERP therapist, and she pretty quickly suggested I go back on medication. I did go back on medication. It helped me engage with the therapy so much better. So the baby was born, and immediately in the hospital, this extreme sense of hypervigilance kicked in. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that's probably very normal for a new mom. But this was next level. I had this idea that I can't take my eyes off of her for not even a minute, because if I do, I will never know what has happened to her. I will forever doubt that something could have happened to her, something horrific, because I'd have all these videos playing in my mind. They made me so sad because I was like, wow, this really knows no bounds. Like, this is going to be a really long road. And I knew it was OCD, but it doesn't make it easier. OCD has this way of taking like a very benign situation and building this bridge over to something like very nefarious and convincing you that they are linked, thus making something very challenging.
How did you sort of come to a realization of like knowing what your opponent was when it can jump around so often?
There were definitely like key categories for me, right? It was going to be about marriage, fidelity. It was going to be about parenting. I mean, the common phrase is it attacks what you value most. And that is true. I had this therapist say, like, if it looks and smells like OCD, if it's very unsolvable, if it fits into these different categories, like you have to do your best to put it in a metaphorical box, label it OCD, and put it on a shelf. And so I really tried to do that. A lot of people begin to avoid certain tasks. Being a stay-at-home mom was my job. That's the job I wanted. I wasn't going to let it stop me from doing that. And so I did continue to do all of my parenting tasks. And by doing them, that is exposure. Like, things do get easier. So first time situations then become routine, and it does get easier. So I moved into this phase of like, okay, this has been a year and a half. It's probably here to stay. I can accept it as my new normal. I know the opponent. And so that was my approach. And that was probably a 4-year period and 2 more pregnancies because we wanted a family. We wanted a big family. And sometimes if I really got snagged, I would try to find an OCD article about like someone else with that thought or that theme to just reassure myself, like, okay, it really is OCD. And that in and of itself is a compulsion, but I was okay with that. If I got really stuck, I would just shamelessly call my sister. I say, thank God for sisters. It was actually shortly after my 3rd was born, my sister called to ask how I felt. And I was like, I'm really stuck with this thought. And I know this sounds crazy, and I'm sure it's OCD. Do you think I brought the wrong baby home from the hospital? And she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this right now. I guarantee you brought the right baby home from the hospital. Like, just go enjoy her. And I was like, I know. Like, it'll pass. The struggle is real.
As time went on, how did you sort of come to a realization of how to sort of live with this on a day-to-day basis?
So we got pregnant with a 4th, and that is when it hit me. Like, this thing is insidious and it will outsmart me. I was noticing an uptick in symptoms, and I joined an OCD Zoom group. I was okay knowing that I met the diagnostic criteria for obsessive compulsive disorder. I was not going to talk about it with anyone. I didn't want it to be my identity. I didn't want people to view me through that lens. And there's just a very real fear of being misunderstood and judged. And so I kept it to myself. But now I was with these other people, and that was pretty comforting. The baby had been born. I gave her the middle name of Grace because I'm like, this is going to be a long road, and I need to give myself a lot of grace. And that's when I realized I have to figure out how to answer your question. I have to figure out how to live well with this brain because it is quite powerful. I started back at psychiatry. I just think that's, always a good place to start. And I brought my husband. That was really important this time to I laid out 8 years of obsessional content, pretty unfiltered. I started back in ERP therapy to hit at some of these new things that had emerged. So how do I apply ERP to this stuff that is a little bit more abstract? And then I started doing a ton of reading on my own. I just felt like I'm not going to stop. Like, I am not going to stop because I can't let this take away my quality of life any longer. So academic works, memoirs, podcasts, anything I could get my hands on, and then researching the people who spoke, and then researching their work. I came upon ICBT, inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy. I found a therapist who could do that with me. She'd been trained in it. And I did find that framework to be really helpful in a lot of ways. And then getting in touch with acceptance and commitment therapy, which I think is actually quite helpful for life in general. And just immersing myself. I mean, it was like, it's been 2 years of a lot of work, to be honest, and time. And it's been really worth it. I do feel in a much better position today to manage the way my brain works than I was 2 years ago. I would say another piece that was very important for me was like increasing the communication with my husband. OCD is really lonely. It is a very lonely experience. And I was to a point where I needed him to have a more acute understanding of what my experience looked and felt like. And then we had to be pretty open about how it was showing up in our relationship, because it was in some ways that he was starting to recognize, and then other ways that maybe he wasn't so aware of. And then also this concept that, hey, I do have OCD, and there is a lot of stuff that I have to ascribe irrelevance to, right? I have to just say, no, that's OCD, like I can't pay it attention. But I also have very real thoughts, feelings, and opinions. And in the context of a relationship, like there still has to be room for those. And so how can we as a couple like work together to sort through that stuff and have patience to work through that, so that I do have a voice, but that OCD is not interfering.
It's really amazing to find that sort of balance between your voice and the OCD voice, and being able to kind of navigate that back and forth. And, you know, as you're thinking about the things that you maybe want to share with others who are hearing your story and maybe seeing reflections in themselves, what are some of the things that you'd want to share with them?
Yeah, so evidence-based treatment does work, but it's not, progress is not linear. It may take trial and error to get, with the right therapist, doing the right things in the right way. But it is absolutely worth it. Give yourself grace. If you feel it would be helpful, I would say educate your loved ones. For me, that needed to happen. And most importantly, like, you can be an amazing partner and parent with OCD. You can have a beautiful life with OCD.
That's incredible. And how are you feeling today?
I feel good. I really do. OCD will be here forever. It will. I'm completely fine with accepting that, as long as it's not winning. And so if it starts to win, that's when I need to put in the work.
I love that. Yeah, it's managing rather than trying to eliminate. And
Yep.
It really gives you the power back. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experience. These are the things that, help us get past those sort of media-based understandings of OCD into something that's more realistic and universal. And I hope that the folks listening who hear this, really resonate and take your advice to heart. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.